This is the first caviar produced in Africa. From the highlands of Madagascar, the company Assepenser harvests 10 tons of the expensive fish eggs a year. In 2009, French entrepreneurs took a massive gamble, building a luxury industry in one of the world's poorest countries.
Tout le monde s'est moqué de nous et nous a pris pour des faux. Oui. Les eaux sont tout simplement trop chaudes.
Huge sturgeon farms in China and Europe dominate the market, producing most of the world's caviar. But the company's founders were determined to raise fish for their black gold in the country they had called home since the 1990s.
Nous sommes à plus de 20 millions d'euros d'investissement, c'est colossal.
Now their products are making their way into Michelin-starred kitchens in Europe. So how did Assepenser convince Malagasy locals on a luxury industry? And how did they get customers from around the world to take a chance on African caviar? Traditional caviar can only come from sturgeon. They're native to the northern hemisphere. Many of the most popular species come from the Caspian Sea, where waters can be much colder than Madagascar's.
Dans les autres endroits de Madagascar, les côtes de Madagascar étaient tout à fait inadaptées à l'élevage des sturgeons parce que les eaux auraient été bien trop chaudes.
That's why the founders raised their fish in Lake Montesua, about 1,400 meters above sea level. The team spent months crossing thousands of miles in search of temperate waters like this. The lake rarely tops 25 degrees Celsius, and it gave this farm an advantage. While sturgeon in the Caspian Sea might grow slower during cold winters and hot summers, the company says fish here mature year-round, thanks to these moderate temperatures.
À Madagascar, on peut dire qu'on a 3 ans d'avance sur les croissances, sur la performance, et 3 ans d'avance aussi sur le caviar.
The whole process starts in the hatchery, where they care for thousands of baby fish until they're mature enough for the lake. Sturgeon are notoriously tricky and expensive to raise. Compared to other farm fish, like salmon, sturgeon need a long time to grow. They can take a decade to mature, while a salmon only needs 3 years. So operating a sturgeon farm could cost 5 times more than a salmon one. But the team's first hurdle was keeping the fertilized sturgeon eggs alive along thousands of miles to Madagascar. They failed 4 times, trying to import them from France and Russia. But the 5th time was the charm. The company imported 35,000 healthy sturgeon eggs back in 2013.
Les gens se moquaient de nous, clairement.
That's Delphine Dabazi, one of Assepenser's founders.
Et même les plus grands experts nous ont tous déconseillé de nous lancer dans ce projet faux. C'est que le 26 juin 2017, le jour de la première production du premier poisson, que nous nous sommes dit qu'il y avait une chance que ça fonctionne.
Nearly a decade later, they've grown their fish population to over 60,000. And they raised 6 different species, one of which was thought to be extinct. Only female sturgeon produce caviar, so once they're big enough, the team separates them by sex.
Avec l'aspect extérieur du poisson, on ne peut pas déterminer le mâle de la femelle. Donc du coup, on est obligé d'utiliser un échographe.
The females head to the farm. With 16 hectares of pens, the fish have room to move.
Comme dans tout élevage surdensitaire est voué à l'apparition d'agents pathogènes. Donc au plus on réduit la densité, plus on limite ce risque.
That's Jérôme Bastide. He's the farm's breeding manager.
Donc au maximum, on ne va pas dépasser 25 km².
They use 3 nets to contain the fish in the pens. One where the fish live, an extra net in case they escape, and a net on top to hold back birds. 10 full-time weavers make and mend the nets on site. It takes 31 miles of rope and a month of weaving to make just 1 net. Assepenser has hired and trained 300 Malagasy workers. The company says it pays 3 times the minimum wage.
Ny antony nampatonga anay hiditra tato amin'ity société ty tena hita nisy fivano ny tao saina tokantranonay mampivoatra ny fiainana ahafahanay very Sana kaya vagamiana.
A team heads out to feed the fish 5 days a week. First, crews test the water. When there's enough oxygen, they can start adding feed.
Alohany amy sakafo a, de lemana ny sakafo. Mba tsy hitsingevana, de afangaro tsara. De aparitaka atao ampovoany tsara, mba tivoaka, ivelany. De hoanina ny vary. De hoanina ny paille. De ariana ato anaty kazy. Anaovana kofanana azy.
That's so the food will sink to the bottom, where the sturgeon eat. The company produces about 60 tons of feed a month, made from a base of fish meal and vegetable meal, like soybean or rice bran, yeast, and water. If the fish aren't fed the right thing, Jérôme says they could take twice as long to grow.
Donc d'où l'importance d'avoir un aliment sur mesure par rapport à son espèce.
Et je vais dire que ce qui coûte le plus cher dans l'exploitation, c'est la production de l'aliment du poisson.
The company spends over $130,000 a month on feed alone. Assepenser makes the food on site and sources about 80% of its ingredients from farms nearby.
Ça a développé toute une économie locale en fait. Il y a les paysans, il y a les épiceries.
Donc ça c'est le tout de soja. Ça c'est local.
Arimonda manages the feed mill. His team grinds all the raw materials into powder. Machines then cook and shape the feed into granules. The recipe and size of the pellets change based on the age of the fish.
Plus le poisson est jeune, plus il a besoin d'énergie. Plus le poisson est jeune, plus il a besoin de protéines et
These females are Persian sturgeon. They'll spend the last few weeks of their lives in cold pools.
Qui va permettre en fait d'arrêter le métabolisme de la femelle et d'avoir une très bonne qualité des œufs. Cette étape elle est très importante parce que c'est l'étape qui va nous permettre d'enlever les mauvais ducs que le caviar peut avoir s'il y en a.
These species can be harvested young, at only 7 years old.
Une fois qu'on a abattu les femelles, on va faire la saignée et on va les rincer jusqu'à ce qu'il n'y ait plus aucune goutte de sang qui sorte du poisson.
This sturgeon weighs 16 kilos, but they can go up to 20.
Just ang tanan na ru. Dia to ani farany aloha to kaiky ny vavany ato ny tanan ray. Nday ato ny farany abato. Somary izy mafimafy izy fa somary mafimafy izy ty. De aveo apetaka ato anatin'ny feed, baolina kely ity.
The valuable roe makes up about a fourth of its body weight. Mandim bin Salama worked as a cook before joining Assepenser.
Teo amin'ny volana teo ny anarako an'iny teknika io zany. Dia rehefa zatrazatra mahay an'ilay asako lasa indapety anamoa vitsivety dia mahay an'ilay asako.
But the roe isn't finished caviar just yet. Workers run the eggs over a sieve to separate them from the fish's innards. Then they wash the eggs to remove any leftover bits. These workers spread the roe out so they can see any misshapen or discolored eggs that need to be removed. Now they race against the clock to salt the roe in a minute.
Pourquoi 60 secondes? Parce que si on le fait plus, ça risque de ramollir les œufs.
Any less time, and the eggs won't have a consistent salty taste. The salt, along with 4 months of aging in these fridges, helps develop the caviar's nutty flavor.
Ny ahafantarana hoe tsara ny caviar anankiray dia izy aloha misy gongero ambosy izany hoe maharitra ao am-bava ny tsirony. Dia faharoa tokony misy tsirona beurre fraise. Dia misy bouillon be ihany koa izy a. Dia amin'ny caviar rehefa tena affiné dia mahay mandeha noisettes tsika rehefa tena affiné ny caviar.
A kilo of Rova caviar can go for over $5,000. The cost is on par with European brands. Assepenser exports 90% of its caviar to Europe, but it's up against stiff competition. China is Europe's biggest supplier. It raises sturgeon on massive farms like this one, 3,500 times larger than Assepenser's. Since 2014, China has been selling the most expensive caviar, the kind harvested from beluga sturgeons, seen here at a farm in Florida. But Assepenser is still years away from harvesting its first beluga roe, because it takes nearly double the amount of time to raise the high-priced fish compared to other sturgeon species.
On ne sait pas encore combien on va produire en vitesse de croisière. La vitesse de croisière, ce sera à partir de 2026, 2027 ou 2028, quand nos belugas commenceront à bien produire le caviar.
Until then, Assepenser is trying to sell the caviar types that are ready. The company has opened offices in Paris, Brussels, and New York City in hopes of hooking Western markets on African caviar. The team has already managed to convince chefs at some of Europe's top restaurants.
Vraiment splendide. Faire découvrir des produits comme ça à nos clients, c'est splendide.
Boris Campagnella is the executive chef of Le Crine, a Michelin-starred restaurant. He was one of the first chefs in Paris to put Rova on the menu, back in 2019.
C'est-à-dire que j'ai pas entendu parler, elle est venue me voir un jour, je crois que c'était il y a 3-4 ans, elle est venue me voir dans la cuisine. Elle m'a présenté un caviar, déjà elle a ouvert la boîte. Je dis pas grand-chose, je goûte. Le produit incroyable, un goût, une teneur en bouche, la dureté des œufs, enfin la couleur, enfin tout. Je dis mais comment vous faites pour faire un truc pareil?
He's topped dishes of torched shrimp, lamb tartare, and ceviche with Rova caviar.
J'aime mettre un plat dans le menu avec du caviar.
Like this dish of abalone with brown butter.
Ça c'est de la groseille de mer. Mais on annonce à chaque fois qu'on arrive à la table, on annonce caviar de Madagascar. Donc forcément, ça interpelle. Ah, qu'est-ce que vous avez dit, chef? Caviar d'où? Je connais pas, il faut du caviar Madagascar, mais incroyable.
And Boris isn't the only chef who's stocked these tins. About 15 restaurants across Europe now serve Rova. The company's success abroad has allowed it to invest back into Madagascar. Assepenser started by training locals, like Tafitasoa Ediarivoni
Tia narehefa ny orinasa nanao formation.
And Menchka.
Ny asa talohan'ny orinasa mbola tsy teto aloha dia betsaka ny ankizy teto Mantasoa mbola tsy anasa. Dia rehefa nisy ilay société mipetraka teto dia manodidina zato ny mpiasa avy ao Mantasoa lasa manana asa ato amin'ny Assepenser.
Au départ, on avait beaucoup d'expatriés du monde entier. Et à aujourd'hui, petit à petit, ce sont les Malgaches qui ont remplacé les expatriés.
Satria mponina avy ao Matasoa izay tsy nalala ininana momba ny Nestor Urgent no niakatra lasa cadre dia tena faly be mihitsy.
The company provides rent-free housing for its workers. The housing site also has a grocery store, a mini theater, and a gym.
Nous, on prépare les repas du personnel, à peu près 300 personnes par jour.
That includes 3 meals a day. Most of the employees' food is grown on site.
L'idée est de tirer Madagascar vers le haut et de le sortir un petit peu de sa pauvreté. Et je trouve que plus on fera des produits de luxe à Madagascar, plus on aidera le pays à se développer.